Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's game.
Here we go. Hi, welcome to Transportoholics with me, Alex, and this guy,
Olly?
Olly. All right, we've got.
Yeah, it's just short on it today.
Yeah, we'll short on it. We've got a couple of special people here as well. So,
Okay.
Olly, let's introduce who we've got. Who we've got joining us?
Yeah, so we've got Fiona from Octopus Electric Vehicles. Do you want to say a bit about yourself and introduce who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, I'm Fiona. I run Octopus EV. So we are part of the Octopus Energy Group, which is a large energy tech company now. We've got a number of different businesses. We're a unicorn business about 5 years after launching, which means we're worth over $2 billion
Wow.
now. After
Crazy.
and so my EV bit of our business, we do various things from leasing electric cars, we help install charge points, and we get you great energy tariffs that are designed for EV drivers,
Wow.
including running Powerloop, which is a kind of large-scale vehicle-to-grid project. So you can use electric cars to help balance the grid, which we can talk more about if you like.
Yeah, I just read
Yes,
up on that
yes.
today. It was very interesting. And Paul, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm in total awe of Octopus and Fiona. So I work for, my name is Paul Barnfather, and I work for EA Technology. So unlike Octopus, we're about 50 years old and we're still tiny. We're about 200 people, actually. We've grown a little bit. But I head up the electric vehicle infrastructure team at EA Technology, which sounds really grand. But basically what we do is we're working with electricity networks operators to make sure the networks are ready for all these EVs. So I've always been an energy guy. I'm not a transport guy at all. But I've always had a bit of a passion for transport and EVs. And so when electrification came along, it was a great opportunity for me to move across and do something I really enjoy. So that's how I've got EV in my title, coming up from the energy point of view.
Okay. Yeah, I think I want to start with just quite simply, really, with just how we charge an electric vehicle, because a lot of people, that's going to be a new experience altogether as we move from petrol to diesel. I thought, Fiona, could you explain that one and just how we do that?
Sure. I mean, I guess very simply, if you, at the very basic level, there's electricity pretty much everywhere, right? So you use it all the time. And in a very simple case, you could even get a cable that plugs into your electric car that could even plug into a 3-pin socket in your house, and you could even charge up your electric car that way. The next stage is getting a charge point installed at home, which most people tend to do. So you might get it in your garage or on the outside of your house, and that can typically charge at twice the rate of your normal 3-pin plug.
Yep.
And most people will charge up overnight, a bit like your mobile phone. So you plug it in while you sleep, it charges up, and you start each day with a full charge. Wonderful. And in fact, you can use special energy tariffs, which we can talk about later, to do it cheap when there's lots of green energy going onto the grid. And then the next step is, if you don't have a driveway, for example, or don't have a garage, then maybe you might use a local public charge point. So there might be a local car park or a retailer, maybe a Tesco store, for example, they're putting in a lot of charge points. Or maybe it might be a faster charger that you might get. In fact, all motorway service stations have rapid chargers now, which do it at much faster rates. And if you're lucky enough to own a Tesla, then you might even be able to use their supercharger network to top up.
Wow.
There are a number of other charge point companies now that are bringing out other ones to compete with the Tesla network as well. So Ionity, for example, are now bringing out much faster chargers as well in public locations.
I think when I looked into it, there's about 40 different companies, isn't there, that provide charging.
I didn't know there was that many. I thought it was quite a limited number, like a niche thing.
Isn't I don't own an electric car myself, but is it quite simple? But I've heard some horror stories about like how there's different chargers and you can turn up to a charger and you won't have the right one for your car. Do Octopus provide? Do you provide like converters for all the different ones, or is it more a case of that I turn up with the converter myself at the charging point?
Good question. So essentially, most cars will have 2 different types of connectors in the car.
Right.
So they'll be able to do a kind of type 2 connection, which is the one that you typically use for one of the kind of what we call fast charging, but it's actually pretty slow. And then you might get a rapid charger connector, which would either be CCS or CHAdeMO, depending on the car. So actually, CCS is now like the really commonplace version of this. There's been a kind of our own version of the VHS Betamax type story in car charging. CHAdeMO seems to have lost out. CCS seems to have won. And so when you turn up to most of these rapid chargers, they would typically have a cable there that will plug into your car.
Okay.
And even so, actually, a lot of these chargers will have connectors for both CCS and CHAdeMO, and actually some slightly slower called fast chargers as well. So you're pretty kitted out in terms of the connectors. The key challenge, I think, that you were referring to a minute ago is like all of these different charging companies, though. What you do have to have for some of them is either an RFID card, or maybe you have to download their app, or maybe become a member to be able to use that network. And most of them have been encouraged now. I think they have to have contactless payments for the rapid charging. Paul's smiling, so I'm sure he knows a lot more detail. But for some of these networks, it's still, you can get memberships, and you get cheaper rates if you're a member, or if you've got that kind of stuff. What we have done at Octopus is we've got one single card for a number of different operators. It's called the Electric Juice Network. And so we've got different operators like Osprey, who do rapid charging, Connected Curb, which do curbside charging, and a number of different other ones as well. They're all connected up now, integrated with our system. One card, you can use any of these different operators. It all goes onto the same bill. And if you're an energy customer as well, that will go onto your home energy bill too. So it's made it as simple as possible.
I just wanted to say, because Olly was telling me about you, Paul, saying that you get a lot of people asking and getting the wrong ideas when it comes to charging, and the types of charging, and the kilowatts versus megawatts versus all this kind of watts. So you're like, I've got to clear this up before I just explode. So if you just want to, because I know some people think that a fast charging may be, how can we clear this misleading info around charging and electricity?
I'll give it a go, because it's understandable, because it's a whole new world. I mean, people are used to filling up their car with litres or gallons, and you have to choose petrol or diesel. And other than that, that's pretty much the only choice you've got to make. You've got to put the right one in. Electricity's got a whole new terminology, and it confuses everybody. So you fill your car up with kilowatt hours. That's what we decided to call it in this industry. It's an awful word, but you fill your car up with kilowatt hours, and that's what you buy at the charging station, or that's what you pay your electricity company for. So you fill it up with kilowatt hours, and that's how big the tank is one of the sort of key things on an EV. You don't really think how many gallons can I get in my car. It's not sort of something, but how many kilowatt hours your car can take is a big factor in EV. That's what affects the price. That's what affects the range. So everybody will start to become familiar with how many kilowatt hours does it take. So and it varies from about 40 or so on a modern Nissan Leaf to 100 if you've got a fancy Tesla or something like that. So that you're filling up with kilowatt hours.
That's how many kilowatts you can put into the battery in 1 hour.
That's right. Yeah. So the clue is in the name. Unlike with a petrol station, you don't go to a petrol station and think, well, how fast does it fill my tank up? Because they all kind of fill up your tank at the same rate. But with a charger, how fast it fills your tank up varies. So if you're plugging in at home, as Fiona said, it's a bit slower, and it'll take 6 to 12 hours to fill up. So it's quite a bit slower than a petrol pump, 6 to 12 hours. That's
just waiting there for ages.
Fortunately, you don't have to hold on to it like you do in a petrol station. And, so when people say, how long does it take you to charge your car? Well, about 30 seconds, because I get out and plug it in and go inside, and that's it. And then, as Fiona said, in the morning, fully charged. So it doesn't take you a lot of time, but you've got it, there's a long duration. So that's a 7 kilowatt. So this is now we've gone to the speed. So when someone says kilowatts, this is the speed. This is the new thing that people are sort of getting used to. So 7 kilowatts, about 6 to 12 hours to charge up overnight. But if you go to motorway, you're going to be getting something a bit faster, a 50 kilowatt charger. What does that mean, 50 kilowatts? Well, it'll add about 150 miles in an hour. So if you stop for half an hour, about 70, 80 miles in your tank. So what you do is you don't fill it up like you do with a petrol car. You might fill it up. What you do is you put enough in to get to your destination. So this idea of how long does it take to fill a car up is a bit of a strange question for electric vehicles. You don't really do that. You put enough in to get to where you're going, which is 50, 100, 200 miles. But those are the 50 kilowatt chargers that were referred to, but they're getting faster. I mean, Ionti, Fastned, Tesla, they're up to, over 300 kilowatts now.
Yeah,
I think
amazing. So
I think
the headline figure is 1,000 miles an hour,
wow.
which sounds amazing. But of course, what it means is you charge for about 10 minutes or so, and you've got 100 miles range to get to your destination. So you stop for 10, 15 minutes at these new superchargers. But that's the new tech anyway. That's what gets everybody excited. So that's speed, range, kilowatt hours, what you fill up with, kilowatts, how fast. Hopefully, did I get that?
Perfect. That's incredible. So now you all know, audience, either listening or watching, and we're going to be testing you at the end. All right.
We need a quiz on this.
It's all good. That was perfect.
And Fiona, is Octopus going to be providing does Octopus provide all the different types of chargers then? So you provide the home chargers, you provide the ones that at work, for example, and all the ones in public places as well. Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, so we absolutely can do a bunch of these different things. So we have Octopus Energy Services. Octopus Energy Services are now installing charge points at home and at workplace, at depots and destination locations. And so for our clients and customers from different sizes, we can get chargers. We don't make the chargers, so we have partners in the charging space. So people like Omi, who have very smart chargers that integrate with our clever tariffs, and they optimize it. So we can talk about the tariffs in a second, but basically, depending on when it's cheap, they will look at the pricing signal and it will optimize and charge when it's cheap. People like EO Charging as well have really great chargers, and so we work with really good charging manufacturers for those ones that are at home and at workplaces. And then with public charging, we've got other charging partners again in that space. So people like Osprey that I mentioned earlier, Franklin, Plug and Go, any number of these different providers that then we supply energy to. So we have, again, different energy tariffs, but then we've also integrated into that public network card that we talked about. So we use that spectrum.
Can you explain a bit more about how the energy price varies during the day? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, as you can imagine, it's supply and demand. So we don't have a lot of demand for electricity overnight when we're sleeping. So generally, the price is like relatively low. And then there's a small peak in the morning when we get up for our breakfast. And then
your kettle for your cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's it's relatively low again in the middle of the day. And then between 4 and 7 p.m., it spikes up. It gets more expensive between 4 and 7, which is when we're typically consuming energy. And it's not just about the price of the electricity that's being generated, but it's also about the use of the grid and the use of the energy infrastructure. Okay. So actually, our local energy infrastructure gets a lot busier around that time because we're all consuming energy. And so actually, that's the point where we have slightly more expensive costs on that grid. And so that's another driver for that higher price between 4 and 7. And then it drops off again, typically overnight. Now, again, it depends on what's going on in terms of our generation. So let's say the wind's blowing and we've got loads and loads of wind generation in the middle of the night. In fact, there's now too much. So there's even times where the national grid, they have something called the system operator. So they're optimizing the energy system all the time, and they're paying people to turn up their energy on a short-term basis, their energy generation, or even at times to asking them to not turn it on or switch it off. So they might even at some points ask wind turbines to stop generating electricity. And because wind turbines get subsidies, if we ask them to stop generating, we still pay them the subsidy. So we're essentially paying that wind turbine to no longer
do nothing.
Electricity. And we're like, well, this is crazy. To take our EV drivers to charge up their cars. So we have a dynamic energy tariff that looks at the wholesale price, and at the points when it goes negative, so does our energy tariff go negative. And so actually at that point, and it happened, in fact, last May, I'm excited to these bank holidays. The May bank holiday weekend last year, I think one of our EV drivers charged up enough to be able to, in theory, drive between London and Newcastle and back, and got paid £5 for the pleasure of doing so.
Wow.
He essentially it's like turning up to your petrol station. Here's all your free petrol to get Newcastle and back, and here's a coffee and donut to go with you. So,
I'll take that any day, please.
but I mean, that's not always the case. It has been very cold, and it's been quite on some days, and then those days the prices become more expensive.
Right.
What we do want to do is optimize so that actually you're filling up your car when there is more green energy and when it's cheaper, and there's not as much use on those local grids, the local infrastructure. That's really important. Go on, Paul.
Yeah, I was just going to chip in there. It sounds a bit mad, all this spare capacity that they're paying you to use. And people from other industries think, what are they doing in the electricity industry? This is crazy. Why have they got so much spare? Why are they trying to give it away? And it's probably worth mentioning that electricity is a little bit different to other stuff like water and gas and roads, where if you try to put too many cars down a road that more than it can handle, it just goes a bit slower. If you try and get too much water out the tap and more water than they can supply, the pressure just drops a bit. In electricity, that's not the case. If we try and pull too much power from the grid than it can handle, your lights go out. So we have we've built this national grid, which is like the world's biggest motorway, so that at 5 p.m. on a winter evening, there's no traffic jam. So that we cannot handle congestion on the electricity network. You can on other infrastructure, you can't on electricity. So we've got this huge network that's able for that 1.5 hour in winter when it's really cold. It's built for that. Rest of the time, loads of spare. And there's all of this spare capacity that you don't see because it's there, hidden away. And that's what's available to use. So that's why if you charge your car at the right time, it's pretty cheap. And that's why the price varies. So it's a little different to, say, other infrastructures. Hopefully that helps.
It's one of the most exciting things for me, where people say, "Oh, you've got all these electric cars coming." So we reckon there's going to be 10 or 11 million on the road by 2030. That's not that far away. 9 years' time, 10 or 11 million electric cars on our roads. That's quite a lot. Now, if we do that, let's go back to the kilowatt hours and kilowatts that Paul was talking about earlier. Let's say they are all charging at 7 kilowatts, which is your typical rate of a home charger. Let's say they all plugged in as people got home from work, if we all are going back into work, TBC. But, in theory, 5 and 7, we get home, we plug in the car, all of those 10 million charging at the same time at 7 kilowatts, that's 70 gigawatts of electricity that's being consumed at one moment.
That's insane.
What?
That's insane.
It's also impossible. It's like more than double our peak energy consumption, our peak electricity consumption today, which is just over 60 gigawatts. So it's never going to happen, right? We're never going to see that. But what's really important actually is that we can use the EVs to charge up at different times when we're not consuming electricity already, to start to balance out that, particularly when you've got things like we become more renewable and you get more wind, you get more solar, and they're not matching when we're consuming it. So actually now the EVs can charge up when the wind's blowing, when the solar's, the sun's shining, and we can start to actually balance that grid, balance that generation, and actually it can work really nicely. And this is also when vehicle to grid starts to play a role, which is when you can literally use that car battery for storage. So to Paul's point as well, right, it's very different from other infrastructure. It's difficult to store energy, store electricity cost effectively. But you've already got that storage sitting there in a battery on your driveway. So my lights were going. If you've got a battery sitting there on your driveway, then why would you not use that to store the electricity? And then you can help support that grid at peak times. So let's charge that car up in the middle of the night and then support the grid and feed back to your house, to the neighbours during the peak times. And that's what vehicle to grid is all about.
I put some numbers on how much that actually means. I mean, you pay at home about 15 pence a kilowatt hour. Well, back to kilowatts again. I'm going to have to get used to this terminology. So you pay about 15 pence. Doesn't sound very much. But to generate that electricity, it only cost, even if it was gas, even if you were burning fossil fuels, only about 3 pence to make it. So it costs them 3 pence to make it, but you're paying 15 pence. Why is that? You never pay 3 pence for a kilowatt hour. You pay many times, and it's to pay for all this redundancy. So the thing is, your electricity is actually a lot more than it needs to be because we couldn't do anything about this. We had to pay for all this plant to stand idle. Now, in the world that Fiona's described, where you can match it a bit better and you can real time, because we can't turn your oven on and off real time. We can't turn your cooker on and off real time.
Yeah.
You get upset. But your car charging, if it's plugged in overnight, we can turn, the potential that's there to turn it up now. And if you do that, match supply and demand a bit better, you don't have to pay for all this idle capacity. So instead of paying 15 pence a kilowatt hour, it comes down. So even though you go into renewable energy, which is, comes and goes, your actual energy price comes down. So this is what's fascinating about EVs. They're not just, they don't create a demand on the network. They actually make the network better, which is really exciting. We've never had this before. And I'm really, and so this coming of EVs, it's a real opportunity to change the electricity system for the better.
Well, if I was to...
Oh, go on.
Ollie.
I was just going to add that I saw an interesting fact I saw today was the energy grid, the national grid's dropped down to this new carbon low, hasn't it, in intensity to about 43 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And I guess as you put more electric vehicles into the grid, it's going to drop even further.
Yeah. That was a record low over the weekend, for 40, just over 40 grams. Now, don't forget, we were over 500 about 10 years ago, something like that. But not that long ago.
Yeah.
We're averaging 450 to 500, and we hit 40, and we routinely around the 150 mark. It's come down a lot already. Amazing in 10 years for an industry that doesn't change very much. This is quite something.
That's impressive. Go, Alex.
Speaking of the future, though, what do you think there's any room for wireless charging with this kind of area? Because I know a lot of people have been speculating it, like imagining it. Does it sound like Alice in Wonderland type thing, or would it ever happen? Like, because I know it's been looked at within Southeast Asia, I believe. Yeah, they're looking at that.
It's perfect. First thing, it's perfectly doable. So right. to do wireless charging, whether it's over like a car parking space where you pull up and it charges there and then, or even put it in the road as you drive along, we can do that.
Sounds space age.
Hideously expensive. So it only makes sense right now if there's a real reason to not get out the car and plug in. So as I said before, it takes 30 seconds to get out and plug in. So there are some applications where that makes sense. Taxis on a rank, that's a kind of an obvious one where they're moving down the rank. Buses, stopping a bus and getting out, the driver having to plug it in. This is difficult. Whereas if it stops and if it charges at each bus stop, particularly at the end, wireless charging. Milton Keynes have been trialing this for a few years. Works great. So I think you will get wireless charging fairly soon for those niche applications where it works. I think it'll be a long time before your average car comes fitted with a wireless charging pickup, because basically you're putting a couple of £1,000 worth of technology under the car, which is right where you don't want to be putting technology, near the ground where it gets damaged. It's an expensive, delicate thing, that coil. So it's technically not a problem. Commercially, a bit more difficult.
Right. Okay.
It will come.
Does Octopus have any plans to invest in that kind of technology? Do you know, Fiona?
I mean, it's not something I've thought a lot about myself. I quite like the idea of it for autonomous cars. By the time, in like say 10 years time, where we've got autonomous cars and they need to go somewhere to charge up at some point, actually not having that human element of having to like plug in, I quite like it in that kind of context. But I'm not betting on it in the short term, like Paul was saying.
Okay.
That's fine. But then there's the other aspect of, I know a lot of people are debating where the future of energy is going to be coming from, because there's been a lot of interest within wave energy sources. Where do you think the next steps of future energy is going to be? Either centralized or focusing to? Do you reckon it's going to be wind, or what do you think it's going to be? Because no, nuclear's popping its head up. Same with wave. So either or both of you, whoever wants to fight for it first.
So difficult to call that one, because 10 years ago you'd have said wind. It looks expensive, needs lots of subsidy. Solar, wow, nice but expensive. Wind and solar are the cheapest energy you can get now. It's cheaper than building a gas plant. The price of solar and wind has collapsed, and that's even offshore wind, which is quite hard to do. We haven't got a lot of onshore here, and onshore's cheaper. Obviously, you've got the challenge of where you put it, but it's cheaper still. So they are so cheap that it's going to be tough for nuclear and tough for wave energy. Wave energy sounds wonderful because we've got loads of wave energy around this country, massive amounts of wave energy, but it's really, really expensive, up around the £100 a megawatt hour. Whereas you down to £20 or £30 a megawatt hour for wind and solar. So it's tough for those guys to get the price down. Nuclear, again, it's struggling to be viable below £100 a megawatt hour. And it's, and the competition is charging £20, £30 unsubsidized. That's tough. So I'm never say never, but they have got, the question isn't about the technology. Does the technology work? Yes, it does. Can you generate power from waves? Yes. Can we generate power from nuclear? Yes. We know how to do this. Can we do it cost effectively? That's the challenge.
Whole new thing, yeah.
I guess going back to what Fiona was saying, though, we're going to be like less reliant on energy in the first place, aren't we? If you're going to be able to draw on it from batteries, we'll be able to have more of it. We'll be able to use more of it and store more of it from solar and wind when it's available, and then, like you said, when it's like when it's a cold winter night and we all need to watch the TV, etc., we'll be able to pull that from our cars. So we will have it.
That's it. And it's got, because you're absolutely right. In winter, you think, well, where's the power going to come from when there's no wind and no sun? And what we could have done, even if we were to do something really expensive like electrolyze water and make hydrogen and store that for winter, even if we did something as very expensive and exotic as that, we're still no more expensive than nuclear. And it's so tough to get the costs down for these technologies. I'm not saying it can't be done, and there's lots of very, very clever people work on this, but energy is just so cheap. This is the challenge. It's cheap. Fiona, you sell the stuff, it's cheap.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we have to think about as well around decarbonisation is not just transportation. So transportation is coming now. EVs are coming rapidly now.
Yes,
But also, to get to net zero properly, we need to tackle heating. And, obviously all of our boilers running on gas are not good for the environment. Actually, interestingly, I think it's only about 50% of the population when they're asked realise actually it is contributing to climate change. Contributing to the environment if they've got a gas boiler. Now, actually switching out our boilers and putting in, say, heat pumps or other forms of heating that's powered by electricity or renewable sources is a really big challenge. And it's a big challenge to do that, because when your boiler breaks, actually thinking about a whole new technology and changing things up in your house, or how does it work, that's maybe not the top thing on your mind when you're like, oh, it's cold outside, I've just turned my boiler on, it's not working. So there's a whole piece there in terms of installing them. And then there's a whole piece then in terms of how we generate that electricity as well, because that's an extra demand in terms of the generation and the infrastructure. So there's different layers of this. And I think, somebody was telling me the other day that I think the Climate Change Committee have estimated we need smart generation, infrastructure, we need further infrastructure. Paul, you might know some of these stats better than me. But there's quite a bit still to be thought through over the next 2 decades, for example, as we really make these changes, not just for transportation.
Yeah. You've touched on a really tough. To be honest, decarbonising transport is relatively easy compared to decarbonising heat. We know we can cope with the energy to decarbonise transport by making it electric, because electric vehicle is so much more efficient than a internal combustion vehicle. So we get that gain when we switch to electricity. With heat, the size of the energy is so much more. So can you put all vehicles onto the grid? Yes, you can. Can we heat all the homes off the grid? No, we can't. It doesn't fit. It's too much. And this is really tough.
Could we not use going back to the power in the batteries of the electric cars, could we not use that then to power homes as well, somehow in the future, possibly?
It can certainly help stagger it, but you still have to generate it in the first place. And then there's also, talk about costs as well. So, like, do you fill up your battery in the car to then give it back to the house at certain times? And it's just balancing out how much it's
Yeah. So to pick up on that, Ollie, absolutely. From day to night, you can use the cars to balance over the day to night pulses. That works brilliantly. The problem is summer to winter. So we've got all the sunshine in summer. We've got wind, at different times of the year.
Yeah.
Problem is storing that over months so that we've got enough power for when it's cold and dark. There isn't enough storage in the cars to do that, so we're going to need something a bit clever to do that. It's the seasonal storage is huge, and that's the challenge for a country like ours that has a big difference between summer and winter.
Makes sense.
I've got another divergent question for you, because why not, right? That's all I seem to be throwing over here. To do with the battery industry, because with EVs and both just energy in general, the battery is getting very interesting these days. What do you think is going to be happening, or what do you think the future of batteries are going to be right now? Because do you reckon they're going to allow for more, both efficiency, divergent uses in terms of, could you apply them to different vehicles that haven't already been applied, like buses, ships, planes, that kind of thing? What do you think? And it's very outlandish, but
it's a good question.
The way that the battery industry is going, it could do anything.
So there's two things. One, they need to be cheaper and lighter. So the battery in a Tesla is running about half a ton at the moment. That's a lot.
Yes, they're very. Yeah.
So you've got half a ton of weight, which we can accommodate. I mean, they're not markedly heavier than normal cars. 1.8 tons. It's perhaps about the weight of a Golf. They're not a couple of 100 kilos, but not so as you'd notice. But still, half a ton of high-tech stuff that you've got to make is A, expensive, and B, takes a lot of energy. So there's a lot of energy goes into that battery to make it, and a lot of expertise and cost, and that's what makes the EVs more expensive than we'd like them to be. So getting that cost down, that's the immediate challenge. How can we get them lighter? How can we get them easier to make? And that's happening with the current technology, I believe. Not a battery expert, but it seems to be improving all the time, and they're getting cheaper. So getting the cost out is the first thing. Second thing, which is going to be a problem, is what are we going to make them out of? They're reasonably plentiful. Some of the other minerals that you need to make them less so. We certainly don't like using cobalt in batteries, and that's coming down.
Yeah.
So there are some unpleasant things needed to make it. They're either rare or expensive or difficult to mine. Those will go. And the people that will work out how to do that will make a lot of money. So it's a bit like silicon chips. The technology will move on. There'll be new generations of cathode chemistry which will take that cost out and take those rare earths out as well. So we're seeing a lot of research on that, but you need to talk to the chemist to get the details. But I'm pretty certain that in 10 years' time, will not be using the same battery chemistry that we're using today. It will have changed.
We need to make them a lot lighter, don't we?
From like NiCads to remember the old batteries that used to charge? They used to get the NiCad ones, and then you got the better ones. I've forgotten the name, but they were much better, and they didn't die quite so early. And the battery technology moved on. That's what will happen. So there will be new stuff. It's coming all the time.
For example, with a plane, you would struggle to get it to take off because of the weight of the batteries at the moment.
Yeah.
It's brilliant to see like the price of the battery technology has come down so quickly. I think it's like 80% reduction in the cost of a battery over 6 years or something amazing. I mean, It's phenomenal, and that just means that you can get more battery for the same cost, and you get much better ranges of vehicles and that kind of stuff. And that's why we're seeing the ranges on vehicles continually inching up. So I think the Mercedes that's just been announced is now talking well over 400 miles on a single charge, which is fantastic. And that's
insane.
It's probably more than most people need, right? Because I think the average person is driving around on average 20 miles a day.
Yeah,
so
I was just going to ask this.
You don't need 400 miles range. Yeah. I mean, I've got 200 on mine, and it's absolutely plenty.
Do you think it's right that that like there's this? I said the industry seems obsessed with increasing the range up and up and up. When, like you say, I think it's like 60%. I think 60% of people do less than 30 that do 60% of people do less than 35. No, 60% of all trips, I think it is, are less than 35 miles in length of all the trips. It's something like that off the top of my head. But especially because of the weight of the batteries, it's really heavy to carry them around. So if you're gonna be carrying all that weight around just to do less than 35 miles, it seems a really inefficient way of doing it.
I think we are going to see a short burst where we get really long ranges, and then people are going to ask these questions, Ollie, which is exactly as you're saying, which is like, do we really need a battery this big? Do we really need this much range? Actually, maybe I'm willing to take a slightly lower range because I don't need that, and I'm I'll pay a bit less or whatever it might be, and we'll see that. But we still see today one of the key blockers is range anxiety. And so until people start to get really comfortable with it, and we see it also when people first get their electric car, they probably only use like the top 50% of their battery, right? And they get nervous because like, what if I run out of electricity to charge up again? I need to charge up, and then people get more and more about it. And then one of the experts in my team who's driven EVs everywhere, like all around Europe. He's done many trips. And he's like taught me now to even trust it, even when it's saying like 1 mile left on the clock, it might be, or like even when it gets to 0% Fiona, it's going to keep driving a bit longer. By the way, I'm not suggesting you definitely try this at home, but I was curious. No, I wasn't curious. I did end up going to a charger one night when I thought it charged up at home. And anyway, I tested it out and it did keep going, and you get more relaxed about the range and using the full range of your battery and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, go on, Paul.
I think on the range thing, I think it will settle down. I see a similar parallel to people, buying cars with a V8 engine in or something like that.
Yeah.
Does anybody really use the V8 or the V12? Of course they don't. But for a car purchase, because it's an emotional purpose as well, a purchase as not just a rational one. If people want to buy a car with 500 miles range or 600 miles range for bragging rights, well, to be honest, let them. They will be paying a lot of money for that car. They'll be carrying around all that extra weight for no purpose. And I think it'll settle down, and people will naturally, the way people settle down to, people didn't all go out and buy V8s just because you could. People settle on a 4-cylinder car because that's all you need. And I think we'll see the same, that people will probably settle down around the 200-mile range. I don't know which it's going to be, but it seems that once people are comfortable with 200-mile range, it's much less of an issue. Less than that, people with 150-mile range vehicles sometimes feel it doesn't go far enough. But I suspect it'll settle. That'll be the sort of sweet spot. But of course, you're going to get high-end cars. And this is like the bragging rights. In the past, it was always how fast does your car go, Mister? What will it do? And now it's how far will it go? That's the new sort of.
I guess another option could be just using it for what you need, isn't it? Like if your day to day, you're only going to need like not very big range, then you could buy a car for that. But when you do want to go further, you could always just rent one for that particular trip, and do it that way.
It's probably worth mentioning about car ownership models. I suspect I might be among the last generation where car ownership was the norm. I'm not sure that when I turned 17, I was obsessed with getting a car, and everybody wanted a car. I don't hear that level of enthusiasm about car ownership among kids today. It sounds like an old so-and-so saying that, but I think it's true. They look at it, it's like, well, why would I pay all this money and all this insurance and have to go through all these hoops for something I don't need? They're not interested, and so I think the car ownership model will shift as well. We're not buying expensive cars.
There's a shift as well. Like there's going to be different levels of this. So there's, first of all, we historically have liked to own our cars as a country. So we do actually have a very high number of people that currently own vehicles. We're seeing that shifting already towards leasing. So it's a bit more like your mobile phone, right? So do you remember when your mobile phone used to like rapidly change? So you'd get one year, you'd have contract for 2 years. You'd have like you'd have a new camera, it'd be like 3 times as good as your last camera. The data would be much bigger, it could go a lot faster, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be a bit like that with EVs for a bit, right? Because you're going to get better ranges. It's like tech on wheels, right? And this tech is going to change, and it might be like different types of batteries, that kind of stuff. So people are going to lease their cars. 2-3 year contracts.
Yeah.
And we're just going to automatically upgrade you into something else. After 2-3 years, you're going to get your new EV. And that car that you've just given back is going to go into the second-hand market, which is also really, really important. That second-hand market is really important.
It's really small at the moment as well.
Tiny, because there's so few cars coming through, because the sales of EVs 3 years ago was very small. There's just not very many cars entering that second-hand market right now. So that's what we'll see happening. We'll see the kind of new cars coming in on these contracts, then moving through into the second-hand market, and actually potentially being leased again for a second time, because not a lot goes wrong in these vehicles. There's very few moving parts, so they last longer, and they're you can take that kind of risk on them as well. So we'll see that happening a bit more. And then what we're seeing particularly right now is salary sacrifice is making electric cars very, very attractive.
Yes.
So if you've heard of Cycle to Work, this is equivalent, but for your electric car. So you get the use of an electric car, you pay for it out of your gross salary, and you can save income.
A lot in tax. Yeah.
Exactly. And actually, we bundle it in. We get the car, the insurance, your servicing and maintenance, all for this one monthly amount out of your gross salary, saving on the income tax and national insurance. So we're seeing people save over £10,000 over 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
Which actually, when they're starting,
Incredible.
when people are like, oh, it's a bit more expensive than the petrol diesel equivalent, you couldn't do this with a petrol diesel car. So actually you can do it with EV, so you're saving that amount of money. And then also there's the running costs, which are so much cheaper, 90% less if you're doing it on some of the home tariffs. And so actually the two combined make them really, really stand up against petrol or diesels. But one thing, this is hot off the press, we've been running a survey, and it looks like 2/3 of people, the numbers, I checked the numbers just before I came on, 67% is the latest number that the survey shows. 67% of people have never heard of electric car salary sacrifice. Just over another 20% of them,
I didn't until today.
but they don't know any of the details behind it. They don't know how it works, or their company doesn't provide it. So that's only just over 10% that are left. Just over 10% where they can access this. So it means that at the minute it's a benefit for very few people. So if people are thinking about getting an electric car, it's worth them knowing about it, just so they can explore it to see if it might be the right thing for them, because it can save them a lot of money.
That was going to be one of my questions about the barrier to entry type things, because I know it seems like a very, comfortable, cushy thing, but a lot of people are kind of standoffish about it or whatever. And it also links over to your tariffs that you were talking about at the start. So I guess I'll ask about the tariffs now as well, because it all kind of locks in, a full circle there.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of barriers to entry, so the upfront cost, well, there's a few of them we've just talked about. The upfront cost is perceived as being higher and can be kind of a petrol diesel, but the total cost of ownership is typically comparable, if not better, for an EV, because it's the lower cost of charging. The tariffs that we have are kind of entry-level EV tariff. We're saying typically you might spend 15 pence per kilowatt hour for energy, for electricity at home. Our entry-level one, the EV tariff, you do 5 pence per kilowatt hour for 4 hours on the night. So that's a third of the price. And so on that, you can typically save 90% of your fuel costs. So if you were spending £150 a month on petrol previously, you're now spending £15 a month on electricity for the same amount of driving. So it's a big saving, right? So even if your lease might be slightly high for your electric car, you've saved on your petrol and diesel costs. Obviously, it's slower while we've all been in lockdown, but as we start to come out of lockdown, it starts to, really start to pay off. Exactly. And also servicing and maintenance tends to be lower as well. So it's typically about 70% saving on servicing and maintenance costs, because in an EV, you've got, say, 20 moving parts compared to about 2,000 in a petrol or diesel car.
I just want to ask you about the equity argument behind electric cars in general, and how to begin with, it is there is a big upfront cost, so you've got to be you've got to have that money to fall in the first place, but then it becomes cheaper over time. But as well as that, it also, like you said, depends where you charge it and how fast you charge it. And I was thinking about it. you could in theory get punished for not having like that off-street parking, because with the off-street parking you're able to charge at those slower, cheaper speeds overnight, whereas if you live, for example, in a block of flats or whatever, you're going to have to pay to get it to charge quicker, aren't you? Unless I guess they provide community slow chargers. Do you know if something like that's going to be happening?
I mean, even if you take, sorry, Paul, I'm just
Go ahead.
even if you take BP Pulse, which used to be
Yep.
Chargemaster, so they obviously have a network of chargers, and you can be a member. And off the top of my head, it used to be about £7.50 a month. I'm not sure exactly what it is right now, but in that region. And I think 80 or 90% of their chargers used to be free to use, and I think they still are. There's still a bunch of them that still are not. And there's some of the slower chargers, not the rapid.
Okay.
And so actually a number of people we know might have got leases for their cars and actually just go and use one of those chargers, while they're shopping, or even if it's just down the road from them. And
Just
so
for free?
yeah,
Wow.
well, for the £7.50 membership.
Right, yeah.
And
That is very good.
I think in Scotland it's Scotland network. Go on, Paul.
Yeah, no, I mean, but Oliver, you picked up on a fantastic point there, that there is a danger of inequality creeping in here. It's like with any new technology, it's more accessible to some than others. And certainly for EVs, those with drives and those without drives, there is a difference at the moment. It's fantastic to be able to charge your car on your drive. It's wonderful, brilliant, but that's not an option for a lot of people. And at the moment, I think you're absolutely right. There is a risk that people in flats, people in terraces, people in urban areas will feel a little left out because they're not able to access this. And we haven't quite solved that yet. It's coming. The on-street parking, provision for charging points at new blocks of flats, but we are still building blocks of flats without charging provision. We're still doing this. It's not in the building regs, so we don't do it. And this for me is, what are we waiting for? We should not. There's enough of a challenge to retrofit the old stuff. We're still building new stuff without the provision to charge vehicles, and yet we know where this is coming. So I think we do need to start including these charging points at work. One example is workplace charging. Again, not for everybody, but if you do work somewhere and you drive to work, but you don't have anywhere to charge at home, charge at work. You can make sure that you've got a full tank on a Friday afternoon. Yeah. That's more than enough to get you through the weekend.
Yeah.
So if you've got a regular workplace, so again, as with all things EV, there is no one solution, one magic thing that works for all. But workplace charging is a solution. On-street charging is a solution. Supermarket charging is a possibility. There are lots of options. So I think it will come, but in order to make sure that people don't miss out in the next few years, we could do with a few policies and a bit of regulation here to make sure that it happens, because what we don't want is haves and have-nots, and it is a risk at the moment. It's temporary, but it is a risk. So I'm glad you raised it. We need to fix this.
I've got a question for Mr. Paul about. Well, no, it's for both of you, because it's to do with, one, do you drive an EV, and two, what's the experience been? Olly was telling me about you, Paul, about your love for the fuel cars. You're a petrol head, and you was kind of like I like the future, but petrol though, and so. Just want to know what your experience has been with both of them, and
I mean, I've always, been into engines and noisy cars and things like that, motorbikes and things like that. But looking at the electric stuff, it's like, when Teslas started to appear, sort of 10 years ago, these things are a bit quick, it's just interesting. And there was a race series in Australia where somebody had electrified a race car, and it was leaving the V8s for dead. And I thought, this is interesting. This is. So I couldn't afford an EV, but 5 years ago I bought a second-hand Ampera, so it was a plug-in hybrid. Just because I thought, I wonder what they're like, to drive in electric mode, and that does about 25, 30 miles in electric. So I thought, at least I can commute in that. So I bought it as an experiment and absolutely loved it. And I was able to do all my commuting, and I was like, it's cheap to run. And so, I had to put petrol in occasionally, but it was like so much better in electric mode than in petrol mode. I was thinking, this has got to be the way to go. And So coincidentally, yesterday I sold it. Somebody bought it.
Oh.
And last Monday, I took delivery of a Tesla under a salary sacrifice.
Very nice.
Yes.
Fiona's absolutely right. I mean, I would never normally go for an exotic car like that, but the current arrangements, if you are fortunate enough to be able to access a salary sacrifice scheme, it's a fantastic way to own a car. So I think this is where most of the sales are going to come. So yes, driving a Model 3 now, which is very nice. So that's been my journey. And finally, as an indulgence to my techiness, I'm building an electric motorbike because I've got
Wow.
two petrol motorbikes, and one of them I'm trying to learn how all this works, and it's the most complicated taxing thing I've ever done because it's trying to learn new tech. But so electrifying a motorbike, and it's coming on, and so I've got the petrol one for reference and the new one. So that's going to be a big learning curve to get really literally under the hood to find out what makes these things tick. But it's fascinating stuff, and it's accessible to sort of an untrained mechanic like me. So yes, you need to know what you're doing, so you don't go sticking your fingers in batteries and things like that. They are dangerous. But with the right training, and I was lucky enough to be able to go on a course in Ireland last year to learn how to do all this, and it was fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to putting that into practice and building electric vehicles. So that's my journey. So,
Does that involve a lot of coding as well?
Yes, I'm having to learn software. I'm having to learn 3D CAD. I'm having so yes, it's EVs. What I've learned is that EVs, and this is why I'm in such awe of EV manufacturers, particularly Tesla. It's so different to a vehicle where you take an engine and you stick it in a chassis and you stick a gearbox on and you couple it all up, and each thing you can sort of do on its own. An EV is a complete software system, and it's really, really difficult to get your head around. But when you get it right, the results are. So it is hard, it is challenging. And I understand why it's kind of scary for, mechanics and people that are familiar with engines, because it is very different. But absolutely doable. So I'm on a bit of a learning journey at the moment.
What about you, Fiona? What's the EV story behind? How did you transition to the EV world?
I mean, I confess that I'm a bit of a nerd, so I was really fascinated as like a teenager as to what we'd be driving. Because even if we didn't the planet, we'd basically at some point run out of petrol and diesel. So either way, we'd have to transition to something else.
Yeah.
So I was really into EVs when I was a teenager in clean tech, and then in some interview for a scholarship, they were like, "Oh, it's not going to be electric cars, it's going to be hydrogen fuel cells." So I went and actually did a placement with part of my degree with BMW doing hydrogen cars in Germany. And I spent like a summer touring the world, going to the World Hydrogen Energy Conference in Japan and going to like a hydrogen filling station in Singapore and all these kind of things, driving a Toyota fuel cell car in America, which is like $5 million worth of R&D.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
At the age of 22, like, do not crash. Point in time, like, EVs were far away. Hydrogen cars were even further away. Both of them really quite far away. So I was like, okay, they're not ready for me yet. And so I was like, and also I love technology. And also in the UK, I think we create great technology. We have really great problem solvers. But yet we are never that great about taking it to market and commercializing.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was like, I want to be somebody that helps take great technology and commercializes great technology. And so I went to learn other business skills. I'd done engineering as my kind of degree, and that's what I've been doing with BMW. So I went to do some other business skills, did some stuff with like Hive, so controlling your heating from your mobile phone and remote controlling devices, connected home technology. And then I was on mat leave, actually. I was on mat leave and a museum with my baby and a friend and her baby, and she was telling me about her Tesla. And she was like, "Oh, it's really great." And I was like, "Is it though? Does it go very far?" All those questions that we get all the time. And it's like, well, where do you charge it? And she was telling me about the supercharger network. And I was like, "Oh, but," and she's like, "Have you not driven one yet?" And I was like, "No." She's like, "You need to go and drive one." And it turned out that while I'd been busy doing all this other stuff, EVs had started to come of age. And I went and did this test drive day, and I drove a Nissan Leaf. This is 2017. Nissan Leaf, a BMW i3, and then a Tesla Model S. And wow, I got in the Nissan Leaf and I was like, this is great. This is totally, I could do this, you know. And then I got the i3, and that was so nippy. Like, you put the acceleration, so it just goes. So much fun. And I was like, wow. And then I got in the Tesla Model S, and of course that,
straight away.
Like a bullet.
Yeah. Yeah.
The guy even let me put it in ludicrous mode, which is amazing.
Oh.
Really, so much fun. And so I just, you know, I didn't know how this is embarrassing, right? I'd been into this as a teenager, and for some reason, by 2017, I had a petrol and a diesel car sitting in my driveway, and electric cars were a real thing. And I was like, how is this possible? How is this possible? And I went into a Nissan dealership, actually, and was like, I'm really interested in this Nissan Leaf. They sent out the new guy on the job. He printed out a brochure because they didn't have any brochures. We sat down, we tried to work out what color that was, or the one that was in the dealership. Then his boss came out and told me that it was going to take me 28 and a half hours to charge. It wasn't even like it was a rounded number. It was like,
Is he trying to put you off buying it?
And then he goes, you've got this Nissan Qashqai here. You've got 2 kids. Can I show you it? And I was like, wow. You know, and obviously there are people out there that want to get electric vehicles that can't because they aren't getting right information. And this is going back a few years. I know Nissan has come a long way since then. Yeah. But there are a lot of incentives to not promote EVs in the right way. And so we are desperately trying to do that. So, you know, provide experts to help you through the cars, help you through the charging, through the financing, things like salary sacrifice, so that, you know, you can access expertise if you're considering it.
Brilliant.
Epic. All right. I think Ollie's got your final questions.
Yeah, so I'll start with you again, Fiona. What's your favourite mode of transport, and any final thoughts you've got?
Oh, gosh. That's a really tough question because I really like cycling with my daughter to school, which is the weirdest thing, but it makes me very happy. Yeah. But I mean,
cycling's my favourite.
Yeah, I mean, I have had a Leaf, and we're lucky enough that we've got a Tesla Model 3 right now. I mean, even the Easter eggs in the Model 3, right? My kids love the fart mode and that stuff. Yeah. You know, not just the acceleration and all the other bits. So I've got a difficult question. Maybe the cycling.
Okay. All right, we'll go to you, Paul.
It's a tough one, that, but I'd probably say train and motorbike. I'm not for cars, despite what I said. You know, I love motorbikes, and I'd ride it a lot more if there are fewer cars on the road. So, but I think for journeys, you know, the train is such an overlooked and wonderful solution. It's already electric mostly. It's fast, it's clean, it's efficient, and we don't make enough use of that. And so I'm a big fan of public transport, actually, despite being. So I'd like to use motorbike more, but fewer cars, please. We've got enough cars.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So that is it in a nutshell. So I just want to say thank you both for shedding awesome insights and awesome things throughout this whole thing. I said thing 700 times in one sentence. I heard them all, and they all hurt just as the last. So yeah, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for thank you for putting up with us. Do you have any kind of final things you want to give out, or final information you want to give about any of your projects or anything else? Or do you just it's up to you, whatever you want to do with these. It's up to you.
No, just thank you for inviting us on. I think as Fiona said, the challenge here is education and spreading the word, and it's just so confusing for people out there. Yeah. And I don't know how to fix this as an engineer. I'm still learning how to communicate as an engineer, but I think what you're doing, and through Transportoholics and these blogs, we've got to get the word out somehow. There's so much misinformation, so much confusion, and so thank you for giving us the chance to hopefully shed a bit of light on some of this stuff. It's great.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, great work.
Awesome. All right, that's it. Right, so that's Transportoholics in a nutshell, and that's Olly, Paul, Fiona, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks
Peace
for
out.
listening.
Good night, and thank you for watching.